Good evening. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Hilaal Live. My name is Faraz Patel. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us. I also like to thank my colleague Luqman Shadrack for taking you through that first part of the show. Now, several key donor countries have said that they will halt funding to the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees following Israel's allegations that staff members who took part in Hamas's 7th of October military operation. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees has fired several people and promised a thorough investigation into the claims, which were not specified, while Israel has vowed to stop the agency's work in Gaza after the war. Now, this comes after the International Court of Justice ruling that Israel must take all measures to prevent genocidal acts in Gaza, but stop short of ordering an immediate halt to operations. Joining me now to discuss this, I'd like to welcome Yasmine Ahmed from Human Rights Watch based in the United Kingdom, and a familiar face here on Hilaal Live, Ubai Aboudi, who is the Executive Director from the Bisan Centre based in Ramallah. Assalamu alaikum to both of you. Thank you so much for joining us. Ubai, I want to start off with you, based in Ramallah. Your reaction to what happened, of course, just 24 hours after the ICJ's ruling to stop that funding.
Well, this is a catastrophic and political decision. Israel is talking about 12 employees, and I want to say that this is also allegedly. The 12 employees have participated in the October 7th attack. So 12 employees out of 13,000 employees that UNRWA employs in the Gaza Strip, and around 25,000 employees that UNRWA employs in total. Let us say, in all areas that it's operating. So this is less, even if the employees are taken as a ratio of the Gaza Strip, it's less than 1 in 1,000. And punishing an entire organization for this alleged, and I would say alleged, because we have known that Israel has lied all over the years, that they have fabricated evidence, that they have taken evidence from forced confessions. And what we saw in the media, because there isn't much information about this issue, is that most of the evidence that they are talking about is taken from confessions. There are thousands of people that have been abducted from Gaza since October 7th. And these thousands are forcefully, we consider them as civil society organizations, as forcefully disappeared. They have not seen lawyers since October 7th. They have not met their counsel. They have not been to court. They have zero access to any human rights or any organizations or any independent legal representation. So how can we take these allegations of the Israeli authorities, and I would name so many cases throughout the history that they have fabricated evidence, that they have made wild accusations, most notably maybe the case of Muhammad Halabi from World Vision, who faced unsubstantiated evidence and claims, let us say, that even exceeded the annual budget of World Vision. And then an Israeli court, after years, indicted him in what can only be described as a legal farce. And this kind of political behavior comes as part of a long history of Israeli government attacks on UNRWA, especially since 2016, when they took the decision that UNRWA should be dismantled because it represents, on the political level, the right of Palestinian refugees to return to their ancestral lands that they were dispossessed from back in 1948.
Yasmine, Ubay mentions catastrophic. This is catastrophic because the people of Gaza, you can't even say they're at their bare bones. They actually below that right now. And this cutting of the funding, it does represent something that is on the brink, if not a disaster right now. Yasmine, are you there?
Excuse me, sorry. As Human Rights Watch, we are extremely concerned by the cutting off of funding by a number of countries to UNRWA. As has been noted, UNRWA is critical for the humanitarian provision of people in Gaza. And we know that what we're seeing unfolding is a humanitarian catastrophe. Human Rights Watch has documented the use of starvation as a weapon of war. We've documented the collective punishment. We know that there are more people now starving in Gaza than anywhere else in the world. And it is extremely worrying that instead of taking steps, instead of acknowledging the steps that UNRWA has in fact taken, they have immediately gone about suspending funding at a time when the International Court of Justice has said there are plausible that Israel is committing genocide, and one of the ways in which it is plausible that they are committing genocide is by stopping humanitarian relief. So it's quite unbelievable that right now these countries are stopping funding to a body which provides a significant amount of humanitarian relief in the midst of what is a humanitarian catastrophe.
Ubai, you're back here in South Africa. The ruling party, the African National Congress, its first Deputy Secretary General, has pleaded with the major donors to lift that suspension. Now, it of course remains to be seen whether that's going to happen, but it needs to be done now, as in now, not later, because what we have been seeing, and this is inverted commas from a statement that was released, of course, collective punishment for the people of Gaza. Is that a perfect word to sum it up right now? The fact that after what happened on Friday, this is now seen as pure collective punishment.
Well, this is actually a political move, collective punishment. This is complicity in genocide. At a time when the Palestinian population in Gaza, about 2.3 million people, have become so much aid dependent because Israel has basically destroyed all of the infrastructure for food production in Gaza, has laid out a complete siege. And the same minister, Minister Katz, that has presented the case against UNRWA, the International Court of Justice quoted him saying, "We will fight." This is Katz's words when he was Minister of Energy and Infrastructure before becoming the foreign minister. "We will fight the terrorist organization Hamas and destroy it. All the civilian population in Gaza is ordered to leave immediately. We will win. They will not receive a drop of water or a single battery until they leave the world." This was a direct quote from him in the International Court of Justice. And now they are playing into his and his government's, of course, radical extremist policy of using starvation as a weapon of war. Now that Israel is ordered by the ICJ to let aid in, and of course this has not happened until now. Aid is entering, still not what the people need, still not enough, and still not to all areas, especially to northern Gaza, where there are hundreds of thousands of Palestinians that are really starving at this moment. They are being described as a level from the UN agencies as a level 5 hunger. They are level 5 starvation, which is quite actually astonishing that these medieval tactics, war tactics, are being employed against the civilian population of an occupied territory of Gaza Strip. And the governments, which I would say most of them, whether it was the US, the UK, Germany, they have genocide in their history. They have practiced and done a couple of genocides throughout their histories. Well, especially when I'm thinking of the UK and the Bengal famine in the 1930s and 40s. So these kinds of actions should be not just condemned, but should be also called out as complicit, as defying the ICJ ruling that said that there should be enough humanitarian. And I'm wondering how come that they take such drastic measures based on unsubstantiated allegations when there are so many confirmed allegations that Israeli soldiers have committed what can only be described as war crimes in Gaza, one after the other. I'm not seeing any cut of military aid, of funding, of support for the Israeli military. So this kind of political move just says on which side of not just history, which side of human rights these governments align themselves.
Yasmine, before we go to the break, the pictures continue to, of course, come on social media. We see them in whatever mainstream media wants to show, that even after the ICJ ruling, the hunger and famine that is happening in Gaza is even becoming worse than what it was before the start of the year. And that, of course, makes the work of your organization within that area even more focused through a magnifying glass, because now is the true test of whether international law can really be abided to.
Yes, well, certainly. So you're quite right that unfortunately, despite the fact that the International Court of Justice, the highest court in the UN system, has found that there's plausible case that Israel is committing genocide and has made very, very clear a decision and orders in relation to what Israel must do to prevent this from happening. We are seeing the continuation of the humanitarian blockade. Other than a trickle of aid, as has been noted, we're seeing people in Gaza in front of our eyes facing starvation and extremely, extremely concerning humanitarian situations, a lack of sanitation, the risk of waterborne diseases and other infectious diseases spreading. So we are very concerned. And I think it's critical now that, yes, we have had this ruling, but now it's really on states who are parties to the International Court of Justice and all states in the UN, really, to ensure that Israel complies with the ruling. We understand that the matter is going to be taken to the UN Security Council. We obviously know there's the issue of the US veto. Certainly, I'm sure something will happen at the UN General Assembly, but each state should be taking measures. They should be imposing sanctions. They should be taking other measures to ensure that Israel complies. And secondly, as the other guest has noted, it is not just about states ensuring that Israel complies. It's that they should stop being complicit in what is happening. This couldn't be happening without weapons being sold to Israel. And we know, obviously, that the majority of weapons comes from the United States. Some also come from the UK and other European countries. These countries continue to allow arms to be sold, despite the fact that those countries themselves, including President Biden, has acknowledged that there have been crimes that have been committed, that have been indiscriminate attacks. And despite the fact of mounting evidence and obviously what the International Court of Justice has said, and as has been noted, the fact that they continue to sell arms despite this mounting evidence of war crimes and other violations, and yet on the basis of allegations that are being, as they should be, being taken very seriously by UNRWA, being investigated. People have already been terminated as a result. But in the face of a humanitarian catastrophe, that they are stopping funding. It is the inconsistency and the double standards are just deplorable.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Yasmine and Ubai. We'll be back after this break. Welcome back to Hilaal Live. I'm in conversation with Yasmine Ahmed from Human Rights Watch in the United Kingdom and Ubai Aboudi from the Bisan Centre in Ramallah. Yasmine, so of course the ICJ ruling occurred on Friday, and the big question is, will Israel abide by these rulings? Now, of course, we saw strong statements from their leaders saying that they will do whatever they can to go ahead and protect the rights of their citizens and their country. Now, with these rulings, and of course the fact that they've got 1 month to submit papers on why this is not a genocidal act, number one, and of course, number two, that they are doing everything in their power to prevent the deaths of civilians. But they've said the presidents, haven't they? And it just feels as if there is no way that they may want to stop with these continuous bombings, because 24 hours later, they were back at it again. So they are tying themselves a bit to the corner, aren't they, in terms of really adhering to those rulings by the ICJ?
Yes, I mean, I think it's very concerning that Israel, and also not just Israel, but its states who are allied with Israel, including the United Kingdom, certainly, have seemed to suggest that the interim ruling will not necessarily be complied with, nor does it have to be complied with. It is very clear, obviously, it's an international obligation for Israel to do so. And it's certainly an international obligation for other signatories of the Genocide Convention to ensure that they prevent genocide as well, including the United Kingdom. But I think we are very worried. I mean, the ruling was very, very clear of the ICJ that immediate humanitarian provision should be allowed into Gaza, and we have not seen the kind of humanitarian provision that is needed immediately. As has been noted, unfortunately, not only is Israel not providing the humanitarian provision that needs to be coming in immediately at the level and significance that it does, but now we're seeing states taking away funding from UNRWA, which is one of the key bodies through which some of this key humanitarian provision is actually coming. So I think it's certainly worrying that the International Court of Justice has issued a judgment, and it does not appear to be taken seriously either by Israel nor by Israel's allies. And I think this is going to have a significantly, fundamentally detrimental effect, not only in relation to the protection of civilians who are suffering every day in Gaza, but also to the rules-based order more generally. Because as has been noted, very clearly by a number of commentators, how is it that the United States and the United Kingdom can be calling on Russia, for example, to comply, and Myanmar to be complying with measures of the International Court of Justice when they are not asking Israel to do the same, and in fact they're undermining the very judicial process?
Ubai, we've seen during obviously UN General Assemblies, the overwhelming majority who voted for a ceasefire in Gaza. And I know you get obviously Security Council nations like the United States vetoing it, which ultimately sees it collapse. So that does put into question, international law and whether it can be taken seriously or not. I ask you this as a Palestinian. Given what had happened on Friday, do you have confidence in international law? And are you hopeful that even with this ICJ ruling, somehow Israel can abide to it? Or are they just going to look at it and say, it's another piece of paper and we'll continue doing what we're doing?
Well, look, the international law or international humanitarian law also are an examples, or what, not just an example, are, I would say, the criteria that we should adhere to, and we should always call on nations, on countries, on parties that this is the standard that they should abide by. The fact is that Western countries, I would say global North countries, are not abiding by it, is not a reason for us to abandon these laws, but a reason for us to think about the international mechanisms, even the UN mechanism, and the need for deep reform in it. Well, I think what South Africa has done, especially in presenting the case to the ICJ and getting the provisional measures there, which these countries tried to spin as, oh, they didn't order a ceasefire. But actually, all of the measures that were ordered would not be able to be implemented without a ceasefire. This is concrete. This is the fact. And Israel would have to, if it wants to abide by this international ruling, significantly decrease its military operations in order to abide by it. But in order for us to understand that these systems aren't working is a call for struggle and a call for work in order to change these very systems. This is a corrupt system where a few countries in the world get to veto the international will of the most of the countries around the world. It took them less time to start to take actions and bomb Yemen for disrupting international trade than it took them just to issue a reaction for the starving of children in Gaza, for the killing of civilians, the mass murder of civilians that is happening in Gaza. And this says a lot about what kind of a world system we are living in. And also this says a lot about the changes. And I think South Africa has presented not just a political move by presenting the case to the ICJ. I think it also presented a leadership and a moral power that countries around the world can rally around in order to change this system, which is based on colonialism, repression, and racism. Look, the systematic racism against Palestinians, where they do not even consider us as human beings or our lives on equal importance to other lives, this is a farce in the face of history. This will be a stain in the political careers and in the lives and legacies of all of those presidents and politicians that have contributed to this situation.
We've got one final question for both of you, and I'm going to start off with you, Yasmine. As your organization, as Human Rights Watch, it's as a watchdog movement, as a movement that really views the importance of humans and their lives across the globe, it's become none more so than in Gaza. And with the ICJ ruling on Friday, the adherence to it is even far greater than it was pre-January the 26th. How important is it now that this is viewed even more bigger than it was before? But how much of a role now do Western nations need to play? Especially, of course, the Prime Minister of where you base, Rishi Sunak, who continues to supposedly hide and show his support for Israel and not really condemn what they're doing. And if he's doing it, then of course, the other ally in the United States is going to follow suit. So how much now does Human Rights Watch need to put even more pressure on, for example, the United Kingdom to somehow force Israel to adhere to Friday's ruling?
Yes, well, I think certainly it's the case that, that Friday's ruling made it very, very clear that there's now an independent international court that has said that it's plausible that Israel is committing genocide. What this does is this puts the UK government and the US government and other governments on notice. Now, if there wasn't enough evidence already available, of which there is much evidence from Human Rights Watch, from Amnesty, and from Palestinian human rights organisations, and so on and so forth, now we have the International Court of Justice also saying that serious crimes are being committed. It puts them on notice, and they have an obligation to do everything in their power to prevent genocide. And they also have an obligation to not be complicit in genocide or any other acts, including war crimes, which we have found as serious violations of international humanitarian law. So it is critical now, both in terms of criminal responsibility and state responsibility, that the United Kingdom and the US take this very seriously.
Ubai, from a Palestinian perspective, the ICJ ruling is, of course, the ruling, but is there a slight hope within the West Bank part of Palestine, the parts of Ramallah and Jenin and Jericho and so on, that this is maybe a step in the right direction, if not maybe as significant as many would have wanted it to be, but something small, a small light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, I think that the general feeling here that it's a substantial step. People were disappointed, and they are rightly so, that it didn't order outright a ceasefire, but also the decisions, I think the provisional measures are very good also, the ones that they were ordered. I think it's also a calling for us to put more effort, to put more work and advocacy in connecting with activists, with human rights organizations globally to hold governments accountable. Now there's a case, for example, by the CCR and Center for Constitutional Rights in the US, where they have taken the Biden administration to court on the genocide that's happening in Gaza. I encourage all over Western Europe, in Germany, in the UK, all countries that are complicit in this, to have human rights organizations filing cases. And I can tell you outright that Palestinian organizations, activists, people that have family in Gaza are more than with diaspora, are more than willing to cooperate in all of this. And I would say that what's happening is also an opportunity for the ICJ ruling, is an opportunity for people to rally around the calling for justice, for respect for human rights, and for decolonization. Unfortunately, colonialism and racism are not part of the past. What's happening in Gaza, they have proven that they are very much still on the agenda of Western governments, not just the Israeli government, who has continued its occupation Palestinian lands.
Ubai, Yasmine, thank you so much for joining us here on Hilaal Live. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you.
Ubai Aboudi from the Bisan Centre based in Ramallah, and Yasmine Ahmed from Human Rights Watch based in the United Kingdom. After the break, I'll have your latest in news. Do stay tuned.